My name is Andy Whitmore. What we're going to do is take your MIDI parts and record them through the different analog synthesizers. We've got a couple of mini Moogs here. This is very good for bass sounds. It's also very good for lead sounds. So if you play like a nice lead solo, it's going to come out really well on the Moog because it's like legendary monophonic synth. Now we've got the vintage one here, which is great for bass sounds, really fat, and great for those real analog sounds, but it's really good for actual live playing. Whereas this is the Mini Moog Model D reissue, and this one is much better on MIDI because you can tweak it so that the pitch bend's similar to what you got on the virtual synths on your Logic Pro or similar. Prophet 5 is a Rev 3.0 and it's Rev 3.2, which is, they've both got MIDI. I found that if you record both the Prophet 5s at the same time, this Prophet 5 comes out of one speaker, that Prophet 5 comes out of another speaker. They've all got the same sounds in, so if you look at the dots, you've got like 2, 1 and 2, 2, 1, 2. We MIDI these together, record your MIDI parts through both the synths, and they sound virtually the same, but they don't sound exactly the same, and that's the beauty of it. In a sense, you've got a stereo Prophet 5. The Prophet VS, that's digital oscillators going through an analog amplifier and filter. It's got some great glassy sounds in, but because it's going through analog filters, you still got that little unpredictable sound. Jupiter 4, scary synth. It's a little bit wild, a little bit out of control, and that's what makes it sound so fantastic. It sounded way better than I was ever expecting when I bought it. It's one of my favourite synths. It's only 4 notes polyphonic. It's got fantastic filters, and it's got the legendary Roland chips in, which sound different to the Curtis chips in the Prophet 5 and the OB8. Got another Roland synth. This was originally meant to be the rack mount version of the Jupiter 8. In fact, it's a little bit like the Jupiter 8 and it's also a little bit like the Jupiter 6, but it's absolute awesome sound. I bought this because it's got the gated MKS80 sound that was used on Crazy by Seal, but it's got some brilliant sounds in it. And it's really warm and really fat sounding. MC202, which is basically an SH101. I can MIDI the MC202 and the SH101 together to do exactly the same sounds, but you've got just the slight differences of what you get with analog. Studio Electronics SEX1, very nice synth, not as fat as the Mini Moog, but it's got its own character and it's a little bit more complicated, so you can get more complicated sounds than the Moog. AKS Synthy, it's the suitcase version of the VCS3, which was used on Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. It's been used on thousands of songs, but that's one of the most famous ones. Very good for sequence sounds, making sound effects. As you can see from the patch bay, it's completely programmable. Oberheim Obi-Wan, there was less than 200 of these made. Absolute wonderful live synth, quite complicated, very exciting synth. ARP Odyssey, 2 oscillators, duophonic or monophonic, and it was ARP's answer to the Mini Moog. It kind of concentrates more on the top end, whereas the Mini Moog kind of concentrates more on the bottom end. So it's got loads and loads of high frequencies, and there's a lot of scope for cross modulation because you can literally route anything anywhere. The SH101, this is classic Roland synth. Not very expensive to buy when I bought it, but it's just such a great sound that they've shot up in value. That's great for monophonic and filtering sounds and sequence sounds. Juno 106, this has become a very trendy synth at the moment. It's got lots of famous presets in. This has got the factory presets in. Got digital oscillators and analog filters, so a bit like the Prophet VS. This means it's got a different set of sounds to the other synths, which are just totally analog. 2 vocoders here, roller vocoder. This is a Mark 1, this is a Mark 2. Absolute great synths. They've got a classic string sound in, which you hear on a lot of the old 80s records, the disco records and stuff. But obviously it's well known for being a vocoder, and we're going to get some amazing vocoder sounds out of it. Oberheim Expander. This is a very versatile synth. It's got the cross modulation, oscillate one oscillator by another, and you get some very complicated sounds, but you've always got this fatness that comes from Oberheim. The Oberheim Obi-Wan, one of the most famous Oberheims, absolute monster, the fattest sounds. You've got all the controls at your fingertips so you can mess around with the filters. Okay, and we're going to be sticking all these synths through Logic Pro, developing your sounds.